Delicious, life-sustaining coffee. Guys, it's early. I've been filming all of my videos early lately. I've been complaining about it, but you know what? Sometimes you just gotta get up early and do it. But today, I'm gonna turn on these lights. Oh. Ooh, I hate fluorescent lights. They're so hideous. But you know what? Sacrifices gotta be made, because let me tell you more about verbs. I know, verbs, right? So many of my videos lately have been about verbs, but there's a lot you need to know about verbs, and you aren't here for me to tell you about them. So a couple of days ago, I posted you guys a video about sum, about the irregular verb sum, and I talked a little bit about how the whole reason why we even have this term irregular verbs is because most verbs you can predict what they're going to look like just by knowing their stem. You know their stem, you apply verb endings to it, boom. You don't need to know the verb already. You have to be able to see that stem, and you can apply the endings, and you can predict all the forms. Assume isn't, right? It's irregular. You have to actually memorize those forms, and where there's variations in the stem that you wouldn't otherwise predict. Assume is not the only irregular verb. Now, Latin has very few. Latin has maybe a dozen, and that's me aiming high. I can only think of 9 or 10. But just in case I'm wrong, let's say it has a dozen irregular verbs, probably less. There's a small handful that you're going to be using in Latin 1, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and show you the rest of the irregular verbs today. Now, to the literal time that it is, most of you have not seen these yet, but in the coming weeks you will soon. And again, if you're watching this in the future, then you've probably seen any number of verbs. So I want to start with one that's related to sum, because sum is itself irregular, and I showed you those forms. Go look at them again if you need to, or you can actually just see them in this verb here. This is possum posse, the verb to be able, and it in fact is a compound of sum. So when you look at these forms, right, you actually see in the blue part that I put there all of the forms of sum. But there's been a thing added to the front, and this is not the only compound of sum. There are a lot of little prefixes that can get stuck on the front. This, however, is a notable one, because when you stick this POS or POT on the front, it makes the verb mean not to be, but to be able, or to be capable, or to be possible. But there's a little variation that you want to pay attention to. If the form of sum in its original form started with an S, then you're going to add POS. If your form of sum originally started with an E, then you're going to add POT, all right? And that's actually going to be true for every form of possum you ever learn from here on out. It's cool. You can take that to the bank. But now's a good time to find out about these basic forms, because you will see them in the soonish future, okay? So that's possum, means to be able. Oh, and by the way, the first person, if you've forgotten, right? First person is just saying, I am able, you are able, he, she, it is able. Same stuff that we talked about from the verb video that was going over the basic personal endings. Now, that's not the only irregular verb. Probably, in my opinion, the most irregular verb, or at least the most annoying one for Latin 1 students, is the verb to want. Wolowele. There we go. Make that straighter for you. All right, and you can already see some wicked irregularity right there. You're going from VO and WOLO to VE in the infinitive, the part that actually means to wish. That's pretty weird. And already you've seen that on these irregular verbs, the infinitives don't end in RE, right? Every other verb you've seen in your book, the infinitives end in RE, but not in essa, not in passa, not in wella. And check out these forms. When you actually conjugate it, you start off with wolo. That doesn't seem so weird. But then there's no O at all in the second person. If you want to say you wish, the O vanishes, the L vanishes, and you just get wees. And then in the third person, which is the first version of this that you'll actually see, I think some of you have already seen it, he or she wishes, you don't get the O back, but you do get the L back in wolt. Then you go back to an O for we wish, wolamus. You all wish wultis, O's gone again, and then the O's back in the third person plural, they wish, woland. So that is pretty weird. But that's not the only version of this that you want to know, because there's also a negative version of this. Now, usually if you want to make something negative in Latin, you just put non in front of it. You don't need special knowledge to do that, right? So you can say somebody walks, ambulat. Somebody doesn't walk, non-ambulat. But with this particular verb, if you add non to it, it's going to squish together into one word. Instead of saying non-volo, they say nolo, which kind of makes sense, right? Because they do flow together in a real easy way. So you get nolo nola. But here's the thing, they don't always squish together. If the form of wolo ended in, or sorry, began rather with VOL, then it's going to start with an OL. But if it didn't start with VOL, then it's still going to be two separate words. It would be way easier for us if it just did one thing all the time, but these are irregular verbs. They don't do one thing all the time. That's why we have to learn them separate and special, all right? Now, there's just two more irregular verbs that you're going to be using early on in Latin 1 and that you're going to use frequently throughout all of Latin, all right? One of them is the verb to go. You can imagine why you would use that a lot. It's a pretty simple idea that is often useful. So that verb is ire, okay? And again, you can already see the irregularity. We are back to infinitives that end in re. That's cool, but the first person doesn't begin with an I, and the infinitive does. And that's pretty much the irregularity you see down here in the forms. If you want to say I go, it has an E, ao. If you want to say they go, you have E, aunt. But every other form up here starts with an I. This is one, though, that if you know your other Romance languages at all, then it's not super surprising because you can pretty easily recognize ir in ire. So for, your Spanish and Italian speakers. And I assume French? I don't know. French is baffling to me. But I'll live. I'll make it. And then the last one I want to show you guys is ferro. This means to bear or to carry. Its basic meaning is literally just to carry around. It actually has kind of a lot of meanings, but for now you just need to know that it means to bear or carry. And when you look at the forms here, this one is actually the least irregular of any of these that I'm showing you guys. The stem starts in FER every time. The only reason why it gets included up here in these irregulars is because with our regular verbs, there was always a vowel before the ending. It might have been an A, it might have been an E, it might have been an I. But with this verb, there's not always a vowel before the ending. There's nothing weird or irregular about ferro or ferimus or ferent. If you were just looking at those forms, you might say, oh, it looks like a, third conjugation verb. But a third conjugation verb would have an I or a U at the end before all of its endings, and in these forms, it doesn't. Fers, fert, and fertis. The I has vanished. So, it's irregular. And you do actually have to know that. If you were to make a mistake and accidentally put an I in one of those forms that doesn't have one, it would be a different verb. Because there's a real similar verb that does have I's where this one does not. So, that way, if you were saying oh, hey, what's that, if you put an I in fairs, for instance, if you were to say oh, what's that book you're carrying, you would end up saying, what's that book you're striking down? It's a real different sentence. Okay, that's a very basic and dirty rundown of the irregular verbs that you need to know for Latin 1. I'm going to go because this video is already going on longer than I wanted, but I will see you guys in class ever so soon. Bye!